Hello, and welcome to Sleepy Stories, a place where sound and history meet, not in grand crescendos, but in gentle harmonies that calm the heart. Here we wander slowly through the lives of composers. We listen to their stories the way one might listen to a lullaby, softly, patiently, without hurry. If you find comfort in these peaceful journeys, I invite you to like this video. And if you wish to return to more quiet reflections on sound and imagination, you can subscribe. Each story is an invitation to rest, to reflect, and to find serenity in the melodies of the past. Let the voice guide you like a hand moving lightly across piano keys. Let your breath settle, your shoulders soften, and your mind open to the gentle rhythm of creativity. Tonight we follow a different kind of dreamer. Not one who worked in marble or pigment, but one who shaped feeling itself. A composer who heard poetry in simple melodies, who found vast emotion in small rooms, candlelight and the hush between notes. Franz Schubert, composer, wanderer, quiet soul of Vienna. A man who wrote not to command attention, but to share something tender and fleeting. He composed music that did not seek the stage alone, but lived comfortably in parlors, among friends, carried by the human voice and the steady breath of the piano. He was born in a modest neighborhood of Vienna, where narrow streets echoed with footsteps and distant church bells, and where music was woven into daily life. From an early age, sound seemed to arrive to him naturally, melodies forming as easily as thought, harmonies unfolding without effort, as though they had been waiting patiently to be heard. Imagine him as a young boy, walking familiar streets, melodies gathering quietly in his mind, unaware that one day he would give voice to longing, solitude, and gentle hope for generations to come. His life followed no grand arc of triumph. Instead, it moved softly. From classroom to rented room, from friendship to friendship, guided always by an inner pull toward composition. Schubert wrote songs of love and loss, of wandering and restlessness, of winter roads and distant horizons. His music speaks not in declarations, but in confidences. Each melody feels like a thought spoken just before sleep, each harmony a place to pause and breathe. His journey was marked by uncertainty, fragile health, financial strain, recognition that came slowly, if at all. And yet, even in quiet hardship, he continued to write, song after song, page after page, as if sound itself were a form of shelter. Tonight, as his story unfolds, allow your thought to drift the way his melodies once did, unhurried, reflective, and warm. Feel your breathing deepen. Let the body grow heavy and still. Let the quiet gather around you like lamplight in a small Viennese room. This is not a story of spectacle or applause. It is a meditation on intimacy, on friendship, and on the quiet courage it takes to express the inner world in sound. Thank you for being here. Now, allow the noise of the day to fade as we begin the gentle and lingering journey of Franz Schubert. Composer of whispered melodies, wandering hearts, and songs that feel like home, Vienna rests beneath a pale morning sky, the city not yet awake, but never entirely asleep. Cobblestone streets hold the cool of night, and the air carries the faint memory of footsteps already past. Lamps still glow in doorways, their amber light soft and unassertive, lingering as if reluctant to yield to daylight. Somewhere nearby, a bell marks the hour, its sound rounded and distant, dissolving gently into the hush rather than breaking it. This is the hour when the city seems to listen to itself. It is Vienna in the early years of the 19th century, a place shaped by music as much as by stone and timber. Sound lives here with unusual familiarity. It drifts from open windows, settles into stairwells, moves quietly through cafes before the first cups are poured. Music is not confined to stages or salons alone. It belongs equally to classrooms, churches, modest apartments, and narrow courtyards, where echoes linger longer than expected. Even silence carries weight here, textured by the expectation that it will soon be filled. Morning arrives without urgency. Shutters lift one by one, not in unison but according to private rhythms. A baker opens his door, and the warmth inside spills briefly into the street, carrying the scent of bread and grain. A carriage rolls past slowly, wheels softened by damp stone. Along the river, the Danube reflects the sky in muted tones, grey layered with silver, neither bright nor dark, simply present. Vienna does not hurry itself awake. It allows the day to approach. Within this city moves a young composer who blends easily into the background. He does not stride with purpose that demands notice, nor does he carry the confidence of reputation. Franz Schubert walks quietly, his figure slight, his clothing modest, his presence gentle enough to pass without comment. He is not unknown, but he is not yet celebrated. And still within him, music forms constantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, with the reliability of breath. Vienna is filled with names already spoken with reverence. Established composers command attention, their works filling halls and drawing rooms, their opinions shaping taste and fashion. Their music reaches outward, claiming space. Schubert exists alongside this grandeur without contesting it. His music does not seek to dominate a room. It prefers closeness. It waits for small gatherings, for listeners seated nearby, for moments when sound is allowed to remain intimate. As dawn brightens, the city settles into its daily movement. Students cross squares with books tucked beneath their arms, footsteps measured and unhurried. Shopkeepers pause in doorways, surveying the street before stepping fully into the day. Somewhere behind a window a piano lid is lifted, keys touched lightly as if testing not the instrument, but the morning itself. Sound emerges cautiously, respectful of the quiet that still holds. Schubert wakes without alarm. Sleep releases him gradually, and his thoughts drift in before his body fully stirs. Melodies linger from the night, incomplete, unresolved, yet persistent. He does not chase them. He has learned that they return when ready. Music arrives to him not as interruption, but as continuation, as though rest and creation belong to the same gentle current. The room he occupies is spare and functional. A narrow bed, a small table, a chair that bears the shape of use rather than comfort. Sheets of paper rest in uneven stacks, edges softened by handling. An instrument stands nearby, marked by familiarity rather than display. Light enters through a narrow window, touching the margins of manuscript pages where notes wait patiently. Nothing in the room insists on attention. Everything invites it. Vienna has always been a city of instruction as well as inspiration. Music education here is formal, precise, disciplined. Students are trained to respect structure, to balance emotion with restraint, to honor established forms. Schubert knows these rules thoroughly. He absorbed them early, internalized them deeply. And yet, what emerges from him often moves differently. His melodies wander without losing direction. His harmonies linger where others might resolve. They seem less concerned with conclusion than with presence. Outside, the city hovers between night and day. Shadows remain long, edges softened. This in-between hour reveals Vienna without performance, without the need to impress. It is a city momentarily unguarded. Schubert belongs to this hour instinctively. He steps into the street, the cool air brushing his face, his breath briefly visible before dissolving. The city accepts him without remark. He walks without destination, guided less by purpose than by attention. Buildings rise close together, their facades worn smooth by time and touch. Windows catch fragments of sky, reflecting pale light in broken shapes. A curtain stirs, then stills. The street listens. Schubert's thoughts move gently, unforced. A musical phrase suggests itself, not complete, not urgent. He allows it to remain unfinished. Another follows, softer still. These fragments do not yet require paper. They turn quietly in the mind, like stones in shallow water. He passes a church, its doors still closed. Inside, silence gathers beneath high ceilings, waiting. Soon voices will rise there, measured and unified, sound shaped by centuries of ritual. Schubert knows this sound intimately. Sacred music formed his earliest experiences, its steady clarity and calm order laying a foundation beneath everything he would later write. Even when his music wanders, it carries this grounding within it. But outside, sound behaves differently. Footsteps fade quickly. Voices soften as they move away. Nothing insists on permanence. This fleeting quality draws him deeply. His music will come to reflect it. Moments offered without guarantee they will remain, beauty allowed to pass through rather than stand still. As morning advances, Vienna awakens more fully. The hum of daily life grows, though it never becomes harsh. The city resumes its quiet industry. Schubert remains part of this movement without directing it. He does not seek to shape the world. He listens for where he belongs within it. Later, friends will gather. Conversations will unfold easily, laughter rising and settling without strain. Music will be shared, not for display, but for companionship. These evenings matter deeply to him. In such rooms, music breathes naturally, freed from expectation, allowed to exist simply because it wishes to. For now, the morning belongs to solitude. Schubert returns indoors, carrying the calm of the streets with him. He sits at the table, paper before him, pen resting lightly in his hand. There is no urgency to begin. He waits for a particular stillness, not excitement, but readiness. When it arrives, he writes. Notes appear quietly, placed with care but without tension. One phrase leads to the next with gentle inevitability. The music does not announce itself. It unfolds, leaving space between gestures, allowing breath to shape its contours. Outside, Vienna continues its day. Inside, another rhythm takes form, slower, inward, attentive. This is how his mornings often begin, not with declarations or plans, but with listening to the city, to silence, to the steady, patient presence of music forming within. Vienna holds him without judgment. It does not rush him toward greatness, nor does it deny him obscurity. It simply exists, offering streets to walk, rooms to inhabit, sounds to receive. In return, Schubert gives it melodies that will one day travel far beyond these narrow streets. For now, they live here, in this modest room, at this small table, in the softened light of early morning. Vienna breathes. Schubert listens. And music, unassuming and faithful, takes its first quiet steps into the day. Franz Schubert entered the world in a part of Vienna, shaped less by elegance than by routine. His neighborhood was practical, orderly, defined by work and instruction rather than display. His father was a school teacher, steady and disciplined, accustomed to structure and repetition. The household followed predictable rhythms, lessons, meals, modest expectations. And within these patterns, sound slowly found its place. Music did not arrive as spectacle. It emerged quietly, as something useful, something to be practiced and refined like handwriting or arithmetic. From an early age, Schubert showed an unusual sensitivity to sound. He listened closely, not only to melodies, but to the spaces between them. Notes seemed to linger longer for him, as if they carried meaning beyond their immediate presence. His father recognized ability where others might have seen distraction. Instruction followed. Violin, piano, voice, each introduced not as indulgence, but as discipline. Music, like teaching, required patience and consistency. The schoolhouse where his father worked was a place of order and repetition. Desks aligned, lessons recited, progress measured carefully. Young Franz moved easily within this environment. He learned quickly, absorbed rules thoroughly, and followed expectations without resistance. Yet even here, amid the structure, something inward was already unfolding. While others focused on accuracy alone, he seemed attuned to shape and feeling, how sounds leaned toward one another, how phrases wanted to breathe. Choral singing became an early home for him. Voices gathered in shared purpose, rising together, settling together, bound by harmony rather than individuality. In these settings, Schubert learned how sound could belong to many at once without losing intimacy. He learned restraint, how to blend, how to listen as much as sing. The discipline of choral life shaped him deeply, instilling a respect for balance and clarity that would remain even as his music grew more personal. Before long, his abilities carried him beyond the local classroom. He was accepted into the Stadtkonvikt, the imperial seminary, a place that combined formal education with rigorous musical training. For a boy of modest background, it was both opportunity and separation. The move introduced him to a broader musical world, one governed by tradition and hierarchy. Days were filled with study, rehearsal, and expectation. Nights offered little privacy, but moments of quiet still found him. At the Stadtkonvikt, Schubert encountered music on a grander scale. Orchestral works, sacred compositions, established masters whose names carried authority. He studied their forms carefully, learning how structure held emotion in place. The music he encountered here was designed for space, for halls and churches, for voices that carried distance. He absorbed it respectfully, even lovingly. But something in him continued to lean inward. He did not rebel against instruction. Instead, he excelled within it. Teachers recognized his gifts, particularly his ease with harmony and melody. Composition came naturally, almost effortlessly. Notes arranged themselves with little struggle, as though guided by instinct rather than calculation. This ease, however, did not translate into confidence. Schubert remained quiet, reserved, attentive. Praise did not alter his posture. He accepted it gently, then returned to work. Living among other students sharpened his awareness of difference. Some pursued music with ambition, eager for recognition, measuring themselves against one another. Schubert observed without comparison. Music was not something he competed with, it was something he inhabited. In spare moments, he wrote, not because he was assigned to, but because the impulse arrived unannounced and persistent. Even as a child, his compositions showed an unusual sense of calm. They did not strive for grandeur. They lingered. They allowed feeling to emerge slowly, without declaration. Teachers noticed this quality, but did not yet know what to make of it. It did not fit easily into prevailing ideals of brilliance or dramatic contrast. It seemed, instead, content to exist quietly alongside them. The discipline of the seminary was strict, and Schubert adapted. Days followed clear schedules, silence was enforced, movement was regulated. Yet within this structure, his inner world expanded. Music became a private refuge, something he could return to when the external world narrowed. He carried melodies with him, held them gently through lessons and rehearsals, revisiting them inwardly when the day allowed no other freedom. When his voice changed, his role within the choir ended. This transition marked a subtle turning point. Singing had connected him physically to sound, allowing him to experience music through breath and resonance. Losing that role did not distance him from music, but it altered the relationship. Composition stepped forward more clearly now, offering a new way to remain close to sound without performing it. Returning home more frequently, Schubert re-entered the world of teaching that had shaped his early life. His father expected him to follow a similar path: practical, stable, respectable. Teaching was a sensible future. Music, though valued, remained secondary. Schubert did not resist these expectations openly. He accepted them quietly, as he accepted most things, carrying his own intentions inward rather than outward. At home, music continued in small domestic forms. Family members played together. Songs were shared without ceremony. These moments reinforced something Schubert already felt deeply: that music belonged naturally in everyday life. It did not require distance or formality. It could live comfortably among ordinary gestures, woven into conversation and routine. As he grew, composition became less an activity and more a condition. He wrote constantly, sometimes with remarkable speed, as if keeping pace with an internal flow that did not pause. Songs, small instrumental pieces, fragments that would never be shared, all poured out without strain. He did not yet question their value. Writing was simply how he remained aligned with himself. Education continued, but ambition did not assert itself. Schubert did not plan a career. He did not envision triumph. The future remained indistinct, shaped more by habit than desire. Teaching loomed as an obligation, composition as a necessity. He balanced both without drama, moving forward step by step. This period of his life was marked by absorption rather than assertion. He learned by listening. He observed without demanding recognition. The structures around him, family, school, church, provided stability. Within them, his musical voice matured quietly, gaining depth without display. What he absorbed most deeply during these years was not technique alone, but atmosphere. The sound of voices blending, the weight of silence after a cadence, the way emotion could be suggested rather than stated. These qualities would later define his work more than any formal achievement. As childhood receded, Schubert carried with him a foundation shaped by teaching and tradition, but softened by inward reflection. He did not emerge as a prodigy announcing himself to the world. He emerged as something quieter, a composer already fluent in restraint, already attuned to the emotional life of sound. The city continued to move around him, teachers continued to instruct, expectations continued to form. Schubert accepted them all with gentle compliance. Yet beneath this surface, something independent had already taken root. Music was no longer simply something he learned. It was something he listened to from within, patiently, faithfully, waiting for the right moments to let it speak. By the time he stood on the threshold of adulthood, his path remained outwardly uncertain, but inwardly clear. Whatever shape his life might take, sound would remain its constant companion, not as ornament, not as ambition, but as a quiet, sustaining presence, steady as breath and just as necessary. As Franz Schubert moved from adolescence into early adulthood, the life that had seemed so ordered and predictable began to shift subtly beneath his feet. The structures that had defined him, home, school, instruction, remained, yet they no longer contained him entirely. There was a sense of restlessness, though it was quiet, almost imperceptible, like the faint movement of clouds across a winter sky. He had learned to live within the expectations of others, to follow rules without resistance, yet his music was calling him elsewhere, towards spaces that could not be measured or disciplined. It was a gentle insistence, a quiet tug that would not be ignored. The transition from student to teacher was the first step along this new, uncertain path. Following in his father's footsteps offered security and predictability, a straightforward occupation that demanded diligence but promised stability. He taught because it was expected, because it was practical, because it allowed him to remain connected to music without having to assert himself in the wider, more competitive world. In many ways, teaching suited him. It provided structure, familiar routines, and the satisfaction of guiding others without the pressure of public acclaim. Yet even as he stood before his pupils, demonstrating scales and harmonies, composing in the margins of lesson plans, something in him longed for a freer expression, a life where music could exist as fully and purely as it did in his mind. Composition during these years was no longer a pastime, it had become a lifeline. Schubert wrote whenever he could, often in stolen moments between lessons or late at night after exhaustion had seeped into his body. His output was remarkable, almost relentless, yet it bore the quiet patience and introspection that had always defined him. Unlike some of his contemporaries, he did not seek to impress with spectacle or virtuosity. His music preferred intimacy. Songs were crafted for small rooms, for close friends, for the subtle listening of those who would hear not only the notes, but the spaces between them. The piano and the human voice became his favored instruments of expression, companions that could convey nuance, longing, and tenderness in ways the grand symphony could not. Even as his compositions multiplied, recognition remained elusive. Public performance was rare, and the wider musical community did not yet know the depth of his gift. Schubert was not ambitious in the conventional sense. He did not write to be lauded, nor did he actively seek patrons or fame. Instead, he cultivated a private, steady dedication to his art. This inward focus shaped his creative voice. His melodies did not shout, they whispered. They lingered in quiet rooms, in candlelight, in the folds of attentive imagination. It was in these intimate spaces that his music would eventually find its truest home. Friendship became an essential companion during this period. Schubert gathered around him a circle of peers, poets, fellow musicians, thinkers, with whom he shared his compositions and ideas. These gatherings, often called Schubertiads, were informal yet transformative. Friends would meet in small apartments, in rooms warmed by candles, the walls heavy with the scent of ink and paper. Music flowed naturally, unhurried, improvisatory at times, reflective at others. Conversation, laughter, and the occasional sigh punctuated the evenings, but always returned to the music itself. In these moments, Schubert's work lived and breathed, unbound by expectation or formality. Yet even amid these joys, uncertainty shadowed his days. Teaching provided sustenance, yet it was work that constrained more than fulfilled. The tension between practical necessity and creative longing was constant, pressing, though never urgent enough to provoke overt rebellion. Schubert's life unfolded along two tracks: the external, measured existence of a young teacher, and the internal, free-flowing realm of a composer whose melodies had yet to find public resonance. This duality shaped both his art and his temperament. During these years, Schubert began to experiment more boldly with forms, exploring the Lied as a primary vehicle for expression. He found the marriage of poetry and music particularly compelling, drawn to texts that spoke quietly of human longing, solitude, and fleeting joy. Words and music intertwined effortlessly in his mind, each amplifying the subtle gestures of the other. The piano became not only accompaniment but equal partner, echoing, anticipating, and deepening the meaning of the song. In these works, one can trace the influence of his early education, discipline and attention to harmony, but it is the freedom of his inner voice that dominates. The songs are not taught or imposed, they emerge naturally, insistently, like a stream that refuses to be diverted. Financial uncertainty was a quiet companion, never fully pressing, but never absent. Schubert lived modestly, reliant in part on his family, in part on the goodwill of friends. He understood the precariousness of his situation, yet he did not let it dominate his life. Composing remained his priority, even when the day's work as a teacher was demanding. And perhaps it was this balance, the tension between necessity and calling, that lent his music its particular warmth and immediacy. He knew the cost of quiet moments of beauty, and each one was written with awareness and care. In private, Schubert's temperament remained reflective, sometimes melancholy, sometimes light with humor. His observations of life, of nature, of human emotion, filtered through his compositions, giving them a depth that belied his years. Walking through Vienna, he absorbed the sounds and rhythms of the streets, the faint harmonies of church bells, the chatter of children, the creak of wheels on cobblestones. These small impressions found their way into his music, carrying intimacy and authenticity. Even the smallest gesture, a sigh, a pause, a minor chord, could be transformed into something resonant and enduring. By the close of this period, Schubert had begun to recognize that his path would not be straightforward. The life expected of him, practical, orderly, respectable, could not contain the full sweep of his creative impulse. Yet he approached this awareness not with anxiety, but with quiet deliberation. He understood that music would demand patience, persistence, and careful cultivation. He would not rush toward recognition. He would not compromise the integrity of his voice for convenience. Instead, he would continue along both tracks, teaching and composing, observing and creating, allowing his inner life to inform, enrich, and sustain him. This period of Schubert's life marks a turning point. It is a time of quiet divergence, when the structure of early education meets the restless energy of a growing creative spirit. The practical demands of life persist, yet his music becomes increasingly urgent, more insistent, even as it remains intimate and reserved. He is learning to navigate the balance between necessity and passion, between the world he occupies and the world he imagines. It is here, in this careful negotiation of external expectation and internal calling, that the foundations of his greatest works begin to take shape. By the time Schubert reached his early 20s, he had discovered a musical world that existed largely beyond formal performance or public acclaim. It was a world of intimacy, of quiet gatherings, of music that breathed in small rooms rather than resonated through grand halls. Here, among close friends and familiar faces, his songs came alive, unfolding slowly like whispered confidences. These domestic spaces, apartments warmed by candlelight, tables scattered with manuscripts, chairs arranged for attentive listeners, became the natural stage for his work. Schubert did not require grandeur. He did not seek applause or acclaim. Instead, he composed for shared experience, for the subtle pleasure of a melody that could linger in the mind long after the notes had faded from the air. The Schubertiads, informal gatherings named for him, though often organized by friends, were the crucibles in which much of his music first took shape. These evenings were neither rehearsed nor performed in any formal sense. They were spaces of companionship, of conversation, laughter, and song. Friends would gather around a piano, candles flickering softly, walls heavy with warmth and shadow. A poet might read a verse aloud, a violinist would follow with gentle accompaniment, and Schubert would respond in kind, playing a new song or improvising a variation on an old one. The music was not created to impress. It existed to be shared, to be absorbed quietly, deeply, by those who were present. In these settings, the Lied became Schubert's most personal medium. The combination of poetry and music allowed him to capture emotion in ways that extended forms could not. He wrote songs that moved between joy and melancholy with subtlety, songs that suggested longing rather than declaring it outright. His melodies flowed naturally, attuned to the cadence of language and the rhythms of speech. The piano in these intimate works was not merely accompaniment. It became a partner, a narrator, a mirror of the singer's voice. It breathed, responded, and completed the sentences begun by words and melody. Every song was a miniature world, a landscape of feeling compressed into a few minutes of sound. Schubert's sensitivity to poetry was exceptional. He chose texts that spoke quietly of human experience, the fleeting joys and sorrows, the gentle melancholy of seasons changing, the intimate concerns of love and friendship. Words were never subservient to music in his hands. Instead, the two flowed together as if preordained. The emotion of the poetry was reflected in the harmony, suggested in the pauses, echoed in the subtle shaping of each phrase. Even the smallest gestures, a suspended chord, a gentle arpeggio, a delicate modulation, carried meaning. The listener, if attentive, was invited into the very inner workings of feeling, offered a space to breathe and reflect. These songs also reveal Schubert's remarkable capacity for economy of expression. He rarely needed grandiose passages or dramatic flourishes to move the heart. A few well-chosen notes, a single phrase repeated with variation, a harmonic shift that mirrors the sentiment of the words, all were sufficient. This economy is part of what gives his leader their enduring intimacy. They are not performed in order to command attention. They exist to connect, to resonate quietly, to offer comfort, reflection, and recognition. They are music for shared understanding, music that inhabits the spaces between people rather than dominating them. The physical spaces themselves were crucial to this intimacy. Rooms were small, often no larger than a single living space. The furniture was simple, yet functional, arranged to encourage attention and presence rather than display. Candles flickered against walls and ceilings, shadows moving slowly across manuscripts. The air was warm with human breath, the occasional aroma of tea or simple food. In such places the music took root. It interacted with the surroundings, softening and deepening in response to the human presence, the small sounds of life unfolding around it. Schubert's songs, composed for these conditions, embody a sense of place. They are architecture of sound designed to inhabit a room as comfortably as the occupants themselves. Friendship and companionship were as important to these gatherings as the music itself. Schubert's closest peers, fellow musicians, poets, thinkers, and sometimes students, gathered not merely to hear his works but to participate. Some would play instruments, others would read. Many would simply listen with quiet attentiveness. In these spaces, music became a form of dialogue. It was conversational rather than declarative. It was offered without expectation and, in turn, received without judgment. The warmth of human connection shaped the works themselves, lending them a softness and intimacy impossible to capture in the formality of a public performance. Yet, despite the intimacy of these rooms and gatherings, Schubert's music did not shrink. It was expansive in its emotional range, capable of expressing both the deepest sorrow and the lightest joy within the same breath. His songs reflected his own inner life, a combination of quiet observation, reflective temperament, and the persistent awareness of impermanence. They offered listeners the rare gift of being understood without explanation. In a single phrase, a melody could suggest longing, happiness, melancholy, or hope, inviting reflection and empathy without forcing it. At this stage in his life, Schubert also began experimenting with larger forms, although he never abandoned the intimacy that defined his work. He wrote sonatas, symphonies, and chamber music, yet these compositions retained a sense of personal attention. Even in orchestral works, the melody often moves as though whispering to a friend rather than announcing itself to a crowd. He preserved the lyricism and delicacy that defined his leader, allowing these qualities to scale naturally into more complex forms. The songs in small rooms remained his guiding principle, shaping every decision, every phrase, every choice of key and tempo. The balance between public expectation and private expression remained delicate. While teaching and financial necessity required a degree of pragmatism, the true life of his music unfolded in these intimate moments. Schubert understood that music needed space to breathe, that creation required patience and attention, that a melody could only fully exist when it was allowed to inhabit the world gently. These domestic settings, modest as they were, became laboratories for emotion, experiments in subtlety, and exercises in human connection. By the end of this period, Schubert had established a style both distinctive and enduring. He had discovered the power of intimacy, the profound impact of subtlety, the emotional resonance of simplicity. In small rooms with friends gathered close and a piano softly sustaining the harmonies, his music found the environment it required. And it is in these small, candlelit spaces that the essence of Schubert's genius is most clearly felt. Not in grand halls or public acclaim, but in the quiet, patient unfolding of sound, the careful shaping of every note, and the profound respect for the listener's space and attention. Schubert's songs from this period reveal the composer fully as both observer and participant, as creator and companion. They capture the essence of human experience in a way that feels immediate, unforced, and alive. Every melody carries the imprint of the room in which it was first played, the presence of those who listened, and the attentiveness of a composer who understood that music could offer solace, insight, and connection in ways larger forms might not. His work reminds us that intimacy, attentiveness, and quiet persistence can produce beauty as enduring as any monumental achievement. Even in the simplicity of a short Lied, Schubert's music carries the weight of lived experience, the texture of everyday life, and the subtle interplay of emotion and observation. Each note is deliberate yet natural, shaped by a composer who knew the value of restraint, of listening, and of patience. The songs for small rooms are not merely compositions, they are invitations, quiet invitations, to step inside a world where emotion is unhurried, where sound carries understanding, and where the human heart can be heard fully, softly, and without judgment. By the time Franz Schubert had ended his mid-20s, the Schubertiads had become more than casual gatherings. They were the lifeblood of his creative existence, spaces in which his music could breathe fully and be experienced in the way he had always intended. These evenings were rarely formal. There was no audience in the conventional sense, no expectation of applause or recognition. Instead, they were intimate, informal, and suffused with quiet companionship. Friends would gather in small apartments, often warmed by candles, the air heavy with the mingled scents of ink, paper, and the faint traces of food and drink. Each person present was both witness and participant, absorbed in the music while contributing to the warmth and vitality of the room. In these gatherings, Schubert's work came alive, not as performance, but as conversation, an exchange of thought, feeling, and subtle musical ideas that could only exist in the shared presence of attentive listeners. Music flowed naturally at these gatherings. Schubert's compositions were presented with simplicity and directness, never imposed with dramatic gesture or showmanship. Sometimes he would play a newly completed song, its notes soft and contemplative, allowing each phrase to settle fully before the next emerged. At other times, improvisation took precedence, the piano guiding the melody as it shifted unpredictably, responding to the emotional currents of the room. These improvisations were not spontaneous accidents. They were a deliberate, controlled flow of creativity, honed by years of careful observation and practice. Friends would join in, reading poetry, singing, or adding the quiet tones of a violin or flute, forming an environment where each contribution was valued, not for technical brilliance, but for its ability to sustain the mood and intimacy of the gathering. The choice of repertoire at the Schubertiads reflected Schubert's own inner world. His lieder, often brief, precise, and emotionally nuanced, were perfectly suited to the domestic scale of the gatherings. Each song was a miniature exploration of human experience, Longing, joy, melancholy, love and reflection, rendered in melodies that unfolded naturally, almost conversationally, across piano and voice. Unlike the grand works designed to fill concert halls, these pieces thrived on subtlety, on space, on the gentle ebb and flow of sound that allowed each listener to inhabit the music in their own way. Schubert understood that intimacy was the true power of these songs. In a quiet room where the listener could attend fully without distraction, the music revealed its emotional depth in a way that no public stage could replicate. The Schubertiades were also social laboratories. They allowed Schubert to observe the interplay between sound, space, and human interaction, teaching him subtle lessons about how music could affect people collectively while remaining intensely personal. Conversation was intertwined with song. A poem might be read aloud, inspiring a composition or improvisation. Laughter would rise and fade, responding to jokes or the gentle playfulness of a musical phrase. Silence, too, had its role, giving weight to the notes that followed, shaping perception and attention. In these moments, Schubert's music was inseparable from the social environment in which it existed. He was learning not only to write melodies, but to understand their effects on those who heard them, refining his sensitivity to the emotional resonance of sound and the ways in which context could amplify or soften it. Beyond the music itself, the Schubertiades provided Schubert with a sense of belonging that he rarely found elsewhere. His personality, introspective and reserved, could have isolated him in more public or competitive settings. But among friends, in rooms that encouraged reflection rather than display, he was free. He could experiment, express, and reveal aspects of himself without fear of judgment. The gatherings reinforced his identity as both a composer and an observer, a man who listened as intently as he created. It was in these spaces that his compositional voice matured, gaining the confidence to articulate complex emotions while remaining subtle, intimate, and unpretentious. Friendship in Schubert's life was inseparable from his music. His closest companions, poets, fellow musicians, students, and occasional patrons, were drawn together by shared curiosity, mutual respect, and a quiet understanding of the world's fragile beauty. These relationships provided both emotional support and intellectual stimulation. They were spaces where music and conversation flowed together, where poetry inspired melody, where the personal and creative were intertwined seamlessly. Schubert's interactions with friends during these years were not merely social. They were deeply formative, shaping his musical priorities, his sense of pacing and phrasing, and his understanding of the interplay between sound and human emotion. The rooms themselves shaped the music. Candles flickered across walls, throwing shadows that moved slowly with the passage of light. The piano, sometimes old, sometimes modest, but always reliable, occupied a central place, its keys the medium through which Schubert communicated most directly. The small spaces encouraged careful listening. No note could be lost, no phrase ignored. The intimacy of the room required that each musical gesture be meaningful, deliberate, and attentive to the emotional context of the audience. In this way, the physical environment of the Schubertiades and Schubert's compositional choices reinforced each other, each shaping the other in subtle, reciprocal ways. Yet, even in these intimate gatherings, Schubert's music displayed remarkable emotional range. A single Lied could move from tender melancholy to quiet hope, from the gentle humor of a domestic moment to the deepest sorrow of unfulfilled longing, all within a few minutes. This capacity for condensed, nuanced expression was a hallmark of his genius. It allowed him to convey profound emotional truth without resorting to the grand gestures or dramatic flourishes expected in public performance. In a small room, these qualities became amplified, the listener drawn into a personal, almost sacred space where sound and feeling intertwined effortlessly. The Schubertiads also reflected the social and cultural conditions of early 19th century Vienna. Music was omnipresent, yet access to formal performance spaces or public recognition was limited for a composer of modest means. Schubert navigated these constraints with intelligence and subtlety, creating environments in which his music could thrive. The gatherings were egalitarian in spirit, valuing participation, attentiveness, and shared experience over hierarchy or technical display. In this sense, the Schubertiads were more than musical salons. They were incubators of emotional intelligence, spaces where aesthetic sensibility was nurtured alongside human connection. Financial concerns were never far from Schubert's mind, but within the Schubertiads their pressure was softened. Compositions could be shared without expectation of payment. Music existed for its own sake as an expression of life, friendship, and understanding. These experiences reinforced a principle that would guide Schubert throughout his career. The value of music is not measured solely by recognition or reward, but by its capacity to move, comfort, and connect people. This philosophy is embedded in every note he composed during this period, every quiet melody written for a friend or performed in a small room. In these gatherings, Schubert also began to experiment with new harmonic and melodic ideas, testing them in real time. The intimate audience allowed for subtlety, for trial, for exploration without consequence. A chord progression could be tested, a vocal line adjusted, a rhythmic nuance explored, and immediate feedback, often in the form of silent absorption or gentle encouragement, informed his ongoing work. The Schubertiads were laboratories for musical innovation, spaces in which the interaction between composer, audience, and environment produced music that was deeply responsive and alive. Through the Schubertiads, Schubert developed an understanding of music as dialogue rather than monologue. His compositions were not statements to be admired from a distance, but conversations, invitations to participate in a shared emotional and intellectual journey. This approach shaped both the content and the style of his work. Even his larger, more ambitious compositions retain traces of the intimacy, attentiveness, and subtlety cultivated in these domestic settings. The songs for small rooms were, in effect, microcosms of his entire creative philosophy, concise, expressive, and deeply human. By the end of this period, Schubert had refined a musical voice that was fully his own. The Schubertiads provided the ideal context for his artistry, allowing him to explore the interplay of melody, harmony, and human emotion in a controlled yet dynamic environment. He learned to balance innovation with accessibility, introspection with social engagement, complexity with simplicity. The friendships, conversations, and quiet attentiveness of these gatherings left an indelible mark on his compositional style, shaping the works that would endure long after the candlelight had faded and the rooms were empty. Even as his health began to falter, and as the broader world remained slow to recognize his genius, Schubert found solace and fulfillment in these evenings. They were reminders that music was not merely an external achievement, but a living, breathing part of daily life, nurtured through attention, care, and shared experience. Each song, each improvisation, each whispered phrase was a testament to the power of intimacy, to the subtle influence of friendship, and to the quiet, persistent beauty of a composer attuned to both sound and the human heart. The Schubertiads, though humble and private, left a legacy that extends far beyond their walls. They reveal the essence of Schubert's creativity, attentive, compassionate, observant, and deeply connected to the people and spaces around him. His music, born in these quiet evenings, continues to invite listeners into the same reflective, intimate spaces, offering moments of calm, understanding, and emotional resonance that transcend time, place, and circumstance. In the gentle rhythm of notes and phrases, the attentive listener can still inhabit the world of candlelight, friendship, and soft piano keys, a world that, for Schubert, was both home and sanctuary. and ultimately the heart of his enduring artistry. As Schubert matured, Vienna itself became both backdrop and participant in his life, a living organism whose rhythm subtly shaped the course of his creativity. The city breathed in quiet ways, the faint clatter of horse-drawn carriages over cobblestones, the distant tolling of church bells marking the hours, the murmured conversation spilling from cafes and shops. Even the soft wind moving through narrow streets seemed to carry a music of its own, delicate yet persistent, filling the spaces between walls and echoing through courtyards where children played and neighbors greeted each other. For Schubert, these ordinary sounds were never merely incidental. They were notes, rhythms, and harmonies to be observed, absorbed, and transfigured into his own compositions. Vienna was not simply the place in which he lived. It was an active presence, shaping his perceptions, refining his sensibilities, and offering constant, subtle inspiration. Walking through the city became a ritual in itself. Schubert's footsteps traced patterns across familiar streets and squares, yet he never walked unobservantly. He noticed the varying tones of voices, the fleeting expressions on passers-by, the cadence of laughter or sighs, the sudden stillness of a courtyard when a door closed or a breeze shifted. These small, ephemeral details became part of the texture of his music. They were reminders that life's melody was composed not only of grand events, but of gentle, everyday occurrences. Even the smallest gestures, a cart squeaking, a bird calling in the morning, a child's shout, found their way into the inner soundscape of his mind, shaping phrasing, rhythm, and emotional inflection in his songs. In many ways, Schubert's Vienna was both muse and collaborator, an intimate companion whose pulse guided the steady flow of his imagination. Cafes and small salons were particularly vital to Schubert's life in this period. These spaces, modest yet alive with conversation and thought, provided both observation and engagement. Here he could watch the interaction of people, listen to stories, and note the humor, pathos, or quiet reflection embedded in ordinary speech. The casual chatter, occasionally interrupted by impromptu music or poetry reading, served as a subtle rehearsal of human emotion. Each observation informed his compositions, imbuing them with authenticity and nuance. The city's vibrancy did not overwhelm him. Instead, it became a lens through which he could better understand the subtleties of expression, of timing, and of emotional resonance. Public recognition, however, remained largely beyond his reach. Concert halls were dominated by established composers, and the opportunities for performance were often dictated by social and financial connections that Schubert, despite his talent, did not possess. Manuscripts circulated quietly among friends, pieces were performed in small apartments or modest rooms, and much of his work existed primarily in private or semi-private contexts. Yet this lack of public acclaim did not diminish the quality or ambition of his music. On the contrary, it allowed him the freedom to compose with subtlety and sincerity, without pressure to conform to popular trends or the expectations of critics. The contrast between the public and private spheres of Vienna mirrored Schubert's own temperament, outwardly quiet, inwardly rich with observation, reflection, and creative energy. The city's duality, its grandeur and its intimacy, its bustle and its quiet corners, taught Schubert the delicate balance between scale and nuance. While he experimented with symphonies, chamber works, and more ambitious compositions, he retained the lyricism and gentle expressiveness that characterized his leader. Even in works designed for larger ensembles, the influence of the city's intimate spaces was evident. The phrasing suggested conversation, the harmonies offered breathing room, and the pacing allowed listeners to inhabit each moment fully. In this way, Vienna's pulse shaped not only his sensory perception, but also his compositional philosophy, instilling an enduring attentiveness to space, time, and emotional subtlety. Social life in Vienna continued to reinforce Schubert's musical priorities. Friends and companions, Often fellow musicians, poets, and thoughtful listeners offered feedback, encouragement, and companionship. Music was not merely performed, it was shared, discussed, and experienced collectively. These interactions provided both intellectual stimulation and emotional sustenance. Schubert observed not only the responses of individuals to his music, but also the interplay among those present, noting how silence, laughter, and conversation could shift the emotional tone of a gathering. This attentiveness to context and human interaction became a hallmark of his later compositions, influencing how he structured phrasing, dynamics, and melodic contour. Even in the modesty of small rooms, Schubert's imagination remained expansive. He often carried sketches of songs, harmonies, or melodic ideas in his mind as he navigated the streets, absorbing the city's rhythms and letting them interact with his creative impulses. The act of walking, observing, and reflecting became a form of composition in itself, a meditative practice in which Vienna's textures were filtered through his sensibilities. He noticed the subtle differences in light as it fell across facades, the varying acoustic qualities of different spaces, and the way a melody seemed to resonate differently depending on where it was played or sung. These careful observations allowed him to create music that was deeply responsive to both space and human perception. In this period, Schubert also confronted the tension between necessity and aspiration. Financial constraints required him to teach and to navigate a world that often prioritized social standing over creative merit. Yet these challenges never diminished his devotion to the inner life of music. Instead, they fostered resilience, patience, and a capacity to find beauty and expression within limitations. The streets of Vienna, the cafes, and the intimate rooms where he gathered with friends became both sanctuary and laboratory, teaching him the value of attentiveness, subtlety, and sustained observation. By the end of this chapter in his life, Schubert had fully internalized the city's pulse. Vienna had become a teacher in its own right, offering lessons in rhythm, harmony, phrasing, and human emotion that no formal instruction could provide. Each step, sound, and encounter contributed to the refinement of his musical voice. Through careful observation and reflective practice, he learned that music was not merely about technical skill or public performance, but about capturing the quiet, persistent currents of life, the small rhythms, the subtle expressions, and the emotional nuances that define human experience. In this delicate interplay between city and composer, Schubert discovered a creative philosophy that would sustain him throughout his life. Music, he realized, thrives when it is attentive, responsive, and connected to the world in which it exists. The pulse of Vienna, in its noise and its silence, its bustle and its intimacy, was imprinted upon him, shaping the phrasing of a melody, the contour of a song, and the cadence of his inner thought. Even as his compositions grew in scale and ambition, they remained infused with the quiet attentiveness cultivated in the streets, cafes, and rooms of his beloved city. Through the lens of Vienna, Schubert understood the subtle art of presence, the music of observation, the beauty of reflection, and the power of attentiveness. His melodies, harmonies, and structures were reflections of a life lived fully within the contours of the city, attentive to its rhythms and open to its subtlety. The quiet pulse of Vienna resonated not only in his work, but in his very being, providing a foundation for the enduring brilliance of his compositions and the intimate beauty that continues to define his music today. The winter months in Vienna seemed to mirror the inner landscapes of Schubert's mind. Snow fell softly along the narrow streets, blanketing rooftops and muffling the city's usual hum, transforming familiar avenues into quiet passages where sound lingered longer and time appeared to stretch. Inside small apartments and modest salons, the flickering glow of candles reflected against walls, creating pools of warmth in the otherwise cold and silent spaces. It was during these months, often solitary yet occasionally shared with friends, that Schubert's music became a mirror of stillness, restraint, and introspection. The winter season carried both an external chill and a quiet intensity, and the composer responded to this duality with works that combined emotional subtlety with structural depth, evoking landscapes of snow, frost, and the long shadows of early nights. Within the intimate confines of his rooms, Schubert allowed himself to wander inwardly, listening to the subtle rhythms of his own breath, the quiet murmur of footsteps in the hallways, the distant echo of Vienna settling under winter skies. These introspective moments were not lonely in the harsh sense, but rather reflective, opportunities to inhabit the emotional terrain of his compositions fully. Song cycles, in particular, emerge from these contemplative periods, each collection of lieder functioning as a miniature journey through emotional landscapes. They carried themes of wandering, longing, and the restless ache of human experience, framed within the delicate yet precise contours of melody and harmony. The winter, with its subdued light and long evenings, provided a natural resonance for the music, songs that could both envelop the listener in quiet reflection and allow the mind to drift freely across imagined terrains of frost and stillness. The imagery of winter became a recurrent motif in his works from this period. Snow-laden fields, the brittle bare branches of trees, the soft gleam of ice on canal surfaces. These were not merely illustrations of environment, but reflections of emotional and psychological states. Each note, each phrase, seemed to shimmer with the weight of observation, as if the act of composing itself were a meditation on the slow passage of time, the fragility of life, and the tender resilience of the human spirit. Winter's stillness provided space for Schubert's music to breathe, to linger, and to offer listeners a sense of calm and introspection that could only be experienced in quiet, attentive company. Song cycles, in particular, embodied the long winter's duality, a tension between motion and stillness, between outward expression and inward reflection. Within these collections, individual songs were interconnected, each a step along a pathway that traced the arc of human emotion. They depicted moments of wandering through literal landscapes and through the landscapes of memory, desire, and longing, while simultaneously offering pauses of quiet contemplation, moments of stillness, in which a single chord or melodic gesture could evoke profound emotional resonance. These cycles were not dramatic in the sense of theatricality. They were restrained, precise, and deeply considered, allowing the listener to inhabit each space fully and to feel the subtle shifts of mood as if breathing alongside the composer himself. The winter months also brought a heightened awareness of mortality and fragility. Schubert's own health, never robust, felt the weight of each season more acutely, and this awareness seeped naturally into his compositions. Yet even as the spectre of illness and impermanence lingered, his music did not falter. It gained depth and nuance, finding beauty in quiet persistence rather than triumph. The long nights and muted streets of Vienna became companions, teaching lessons about subtlety, patience, and the enduring significance of small gestures. In these conditions, Schubert's melodies could swell gently, shimmer softly, and fade with deliberate care, offering the listener an experience of music that was at once intimate, reflective, and expansive. Despite the quiet and introspection, life in Vienna did not cease. The composer still moved through familiar streets, observed the behaviors of those around him, and attended gatherings with friends. Each interaction, no matter how brief or informal, was absorbed and transformed into creative energy. Friends would share poetry, reminiscence, and conversation in small apartments, their voices mingling with the hum of pianos and the occasional plucked string. Schubert's responsiveness to these social rhythms, the interplay of human attention, emotion, and environment, deepened the emotional resonance of his works. Even in cycles that explored solitude, wandering, or melancholy, there remained a thread of connection to the world outside his immediate awareness, a reminder that reflection and human engagement need not be separate. The process of composing during this period became an exercise in careful observation, emotional listening, and disciplined restraint. Schubert worked slowly, allowing ideas to unfold organically rather than forcing resolution or dramatization. Each song cycle emerged from a series of attentive decisions, a chord chosen for its subtle tension, a melody shaped by the rhythm of speech, a harmonic turn that mirrored the movement of thought and feeling. The long winter provided not only temporal space, but emotional space, permitting the music to develop with the patience and quiet consideration it required. In this way, the season itself became a teacher, demonstrating the depth and beauty often arise from restraint, attentiveness, and the deliberate cultivation of stillness. Winter also heightened the sense of temporality, of passing moments and impermanence. Schubert's music from these months often carries an awareness of the fleeting, a phrase that fades just as it resonates, a harmonic shift that gently unsettles expectation, a melody that lingers before dissolving into silence. These qualities give his late song cycles a meditative quality, inviting listeners to inhabit the liminal spaces between sound and stillness, between thought and feeling, between the present moment and memory. The long winter thus becomes both subject and medium, shaping the experience of the music as profoundly as any structural choice. Even in the darkest hours, there remained hope, subtle but insistent. Light filtered through winter clouds, reflected on snow and ice, casting patterns of brightness across streets and interiors. Schubert's melodies captured this quiet persistence, the delicate interplay of shadow and illumination, melancholy and consolation. Each song became a study in contrasts, wandering and stillness, longing and acceptance, fragility and resilience. The long winter was not merely a season, it was an emotional landscape, a canvas upon which the composer painted with the most subtle and careful of brushes. These cycles also reveal Schubert's remarkable sensitivity to poetry. He chose texts that resonated with the slow rhythm of winter, lines that suggested introspection, longing, and reflection without overt dramatization. The piano once more functioned as a partner rather than a backdrop, echoing, supporting, and elaborating the singer's voice. Each harmonic choice, each rhythmic nuance, was aligned with the emotional content of the poetry, creating a unity of sound and meaning that is uniquely Schubertian. Listening to these works is like walking slowly through a winter landscape. Every detail is absorbed, every subtle shift noted, and every moment allows for reflection and quiet appreciation. The long winter, in effect, became both metaphor and method. Through the season's quiet discipline, Schubert honed the precision, subtlety, and emotional sensitivity that define his greatest song cycles. The resulting works are expansive without being grandiose, profound without being heavy-handed, and intimate while evoking universal human experience. They demonstrate that beauty and insight often arise not from excess or overt display, but from careful observation, patient listening, and deliberate expression. In these months, Schubert's music became a mirror not only of his internal life, but of the external world, capturing the quiet rhythms, subdued light, and reflective moods of Vienna in winter. Even as he confronted illness, isolation, and the unceasing challenges of a composer's life, Schubert's work from this period remains suffused with calm attentiveness. There is a sense that each note, each phrase has been placed with care, with awareness of its resonance in time and space, with sensitivity to both composer and listener. The long winter, in all its quiet persistence, shaped the emotional and structural sophistication of his music, teaching lessons in restraint, intimacy, and the beauty that can be found in observation and reflection. As Franz Schubert moved into the final years of his life, there was a subtle, pervasive sense of quiet reflection that seemed to settle over both his days and his music. The energy of youth, so vivid and abundant in earlier years, had given way to a softer rhythm, one marked by attentiveness, by careful observation, and by the slow, deliberate unfolding of both sound and thought. Illness, persistent and inescapable, began to make its presence known with greater insistence, shaping the way he moved through the city, how he approached his work, and even how he experienced the passage of time. Each breath, each quiet moment at the piano, each interaction with friends carried with it the awareness of impermanence, a gentle reminder that life, like music, has a cadence that is both fragile and fleeting. Yet Schubert did not react with fear or despair. Rather, he approached these limitations as he had approached composition all his life. With patient attentiveness, a careful weighing of possibilities, and a devotion to the integrity of the inner voice that guided him. Even in these constrained circumstances, Schubert's creativity remained abundant. His compositions from this period exhibit a contemplative depth, a richness of emotional resonance that was shaped as much by reflection as by technical mastery. Late Lieder, piano works, and chamber pieces from these years are imbued with a quiet dignity and intimacy that invites the listener into spaces of shared thought and subtle feeling. There is a deliberate pacing to these works, a sense that the music has time to breathe, to unfold, to resonate. It is as if Schubert understood that, in the presence of mortality, the true power of music lies not in virtuosity or dramatic gesture, but in its capacity to reflect the nuances of human experience, to give voice to emotion without insistence, and to allow the listener to inhabit the world of the composer with gentle attentiveness. The city of Vienna, familiar yet ever alive, continued to be a subtle companion in these years. Schubert moved through its streets with a quiet awareness, noting the muffled footsteps along snow-covered avenues, the soft murmur of distant voices, the faint glow of candlelight through windows that cast delicate patterns across walls. Even in illness, he observed the rhythms of daily life, absorbing them into the fabric of his compositions. Each interaction with a friend, each shared meal or moment of conversation, was filtered through his perceptive mind and transformed into creative energy. Music was not an isolated endeavor, but a reflection of life as lived. The small joys, the quiet sorrows, and the tender interplay between human presence and environment. The gatherings of the Schubertiads, though sometimes diminished in number, continued to provide both inspiration and companionship. In these intimate salons, friends and fellow musicians would convene, reading poetry aloud, singing together, or simply listening as Schubert's melodies filled the air. Even when his body felt fragile, his spirit remained attuned to the subtle currents of the room. The rise and fall of voices, the pauses between speech, the gestures of hands, or the soft shifting of weight as people settled into the space. Each nuance, each human detail informed the careful phrasing and emotive shaping of his compositions. The gatherings were not performances in the conventional sense, but living laboratories in which the music could be tested, refined, and allowed to resonate within a shared human space. Health limitations did impose constraints, yet these never diminished Schubert's attention to detail or his devotion to the creative process. He worked slowly, meticulously choosing chords that would convey subtle shifts of emotion, shaping melodies with attention to breath and phrasing, and aligning harmonic progressions with the poetic contours of the texts he set to music. Even the quietest passages carry intentionality. The gentle rise and fall of a melodic line mirrors a sigh, a pause between chords evokes reflection, and the interplay of voice and piano embodies the conversation between human thought and feeling. In this way, each composition became not only an artistic statement, but also a meditation on the delicate balance of life itself, an exploration of fragility, resilience, and enduring beauty. These years also brought heightened awareness of time and impermanence. Schubert, acutely aware of the brevity of life, approached his final works with a patience and composure that elevated the subtleties of expression. There was no urgency, no attempt to proclaim his genius to the world. Instead, he cultivated intimacy, creating music that could be experienced slowly, reflectively, and deeply. Each song or quartet carries the weight of lived experience, the careful observation of human emotion, and the quiet understanding that beauty and insight often emerge from restraint, attentiveness, and sensitivity. The compositional decisions he made during these years, subtle harmonic shifts, measured pacing, the space allowed for silence, reflect not only his technical skill, but his emotional awareness and philosophical reflection on life's fleeting nature. Even as illness made daily life more challenging, Schubert's relationships with friends, family, and fellow musicians provided both comfort and inspiration. Letters were exchanged, visits were treasured, and small gatherings offered warmth against the cold and isolation of winter. Friends who had long accompanied him continued to offer encouragement, critique, and companionship, creating an environment in which music could flourish despite physical limitations. In these quiet moments, Schubert's music was not only an extension of his inner life, but also a bridge between individuals, a means of connection, empathy, and shared reflection. The intimacy of these interactions is palpable in the compositions themselves, which carry a sense of human presence even in solitude, a dialogue that extends beyond the immediate space to touch anyone who listens with attention and care. The music of this period often balances melancholy with consolation. Themes of mortality, longing, and introspection are present, yet they are tempered by an underlying serenity and acceptance. There is a recognition of life's impermanence, but it is acknowledged without fear or dramatization. Schubert's compositions become a meditation on existence, reflecting the tension between fragility and resilience, the fleeting and the enduring, the personal and the universal. Listeners are invited into this contemplative space to inhabit it fully and to discover within it the quiet profundity of life itself, a reflection of winter's stillness, candlelight's warmth, and the gentle cadence of Vienna in its quieter moments. Even in his final days, Schubert's devotion to poetry and song remained unwavering. He continued to choose texts that resonated with the meditative quality of his inner life, aligning melody and harmony with the subtleties of phrasing, imagery, and emotional tone. The piano, ever his companion, provided more than accompaniment. It became an extension of his expressive voice, echoing, supporting, and conversing with the singer's lines. The resulting works reveal not only compositional mastery, but also a profound empathy and attentiveness to the human experience. In the hands of listeners, these pieces continue to evoke contemplation, calm, and a sense of shared humanity, as though Schubert's presence lingers in each measured chord and carefully turned phrase. As death approached, there was no grand proclamation or dramatic farewell. Schubert's life ended quietly, surrounded by the city, friends, and familiar spaces that had shaped him. His burial near Beethoven, a subtle acknowledgement of his place within the continuum of musical history, offered closure without grandeur, a recognition of the enduring value of a life devoted to quiet observation, creative attentiveness, and human connection. The final works, composed without hurry, carry the lessons of a lifetime. That beauty emerges from patience, subtlety, and the cultivation of intimacy. That music, like life, is most profound when experienced with care and reflection, and that even in the face of impermanence, attentive creation leaves a lasting mark upon the world. In these final reflections, Schubert teaches that art is inseparable from the rhythms of life itself. The cadence of daily experience, the presence of friends, the quiet observation of the natural and human world, all converge in compositions that embody patience, sensitivity, and enduring emotional resonance. Listeners today continue to encounter these works as meditative spaces, places where attention and presence are rewarded and where the quiet, persistent beauty of the composer's inner life is made manifest. Schubert's nearness to the end is not a tale of loss alone. It is a meditation on the integration of life, friendship, creativity, and mortality. A gentle reminder that even the shortest life, when observed attentively and expressed honestly, can leave a resonance that endures far beyond its temporal bounds. After Franz Schubert's quiet passing, the music he had devoted his life to did not disappear into silence. Instead, it began a gentle, unfolding journey that would stretch across time, finding new ears, new rooms, and new listeners who could sense the intimacy, the attentiveness, and the subtle beauty embedded in each phrase. Recognition did not arrive suddenly or with fanfare. It was a slow bloom, a gradual awakening, like light filtering through a winter morning, soft and patient, revealing shapes and textures that had always been there but had not yet been fully perceived. The works that had once been performed in small salons, among friends who listened with rapt attention, now began to circulate more widely, carried by students, publishers, and enthusiasts who discerned the quiet brilliance and the understated genius of his compositions. Schubert's music, particularly his Lieder, proved to be uniquely suited for this kind of delayed recognition. Intimate in scale, but profound in emotional resonance, his songs offered a space for reflection, for contemplation, and for personal engagement. Unlike the grand symphonies or overtly theatrical operas that demanded immediate public attention, Schubert's works could be discovered slowly, in rooms bathed in candlelight or sunlight, at moments when the listener was attuned to subtlety and nuance. In this way, the afterlife of sound was not a triumphal rise to fame, but a gradual, quiet resonance that deepened over time. Each note, each harmonic turn, each melodic line carried with it the persistence of human presence and the attentive cultivation of emotion that had defined the composer's life. Friends and fellow musicians who had known Schubert personally became important conduits for his legacy. They shared manuscripts, performed his works in gatherings and private homes, and preserved the memory of a man whose life had been defined more by attentiveness than by public acclaim. These early advocates ensured that the essence of his music, its intimacy, its responsiveness to human emotion, its capacity to inhabit quiet spaces, survived beyond his years. Slowly, the world began to recognize that Schubert's contributions were not only technically brilliant, but also emotionally transformative, offering a form of companionship that transcended the immediate presence of the composer. As decades passed, the reach of his music expanded further, touching listeners who had never known him personally. Songs written for a circle of friends now resonated in distant cities, in private homes, and eventually in concert halls where the attentive listener could absorb every nuance of phrasing, every delicate harmonic shift, every subtle rhythmic contour. The intimacy that had been his hallmark remained intact, even as the audience grew larger. Schubert's works became companions to solitude, guides through reflective moments, and gentle reminders of the value of patience, observation, and emotional fidelity. His compositions offered a space in which the mind could wander, rest, and engage with the profound yet understated currents of human experience. The afterlife of sound was not only about recognition, but also about the endurance of subtlety. Schubert's music did not demand attention, it invited it. It did not overwhelm, it offered space. In a world often noisy, hurried, and insistent, his works provided an alternative rhythm, a slower cadence that encouraged deep listening and reflective engagement. Songs could be heard and reheard, revealing new harmonies, phrasing nuances, and emotional textures with each encounter. In this way, the legacy of Schubert was both timeless and intimate, a reminder that the most profound impact is not always immediate, but can unfold quietly across generations. Publishers, scholars, and performers began to recognize the depth of his compositions, ensuring that his manuscripts were preserved, studied, and disseminated. Collections of his songs found their way into conservatories, private collections, and eventually public concert halls. Audiences, who had previously been unfamiliar with the subtle power of Lieder, discovered the extraordinary range of emotion and technical mastery that Schubert had cultivated. Critics and historians noted the expressive economy of his music, the ability to convey vast emotional landscapes with economy and grace, without overt dramatization. The quiet dignity of his compositions, once confined to intimate spaces, now illuminated the wider musical world. Beyond technical mastery, the enduring appeal of Schubert's work lies in its humanity. The songs, chamber works, and piano pieces offer a reflection of the everyday rhythms of life, of subtle emotional shifts, of moments that are easily overlooked yet profoundly felt. The music is not constructed to impress superficially, but to resonate deeply, providing a companion to thought, reflection, and feeling. Listeners are drawn into a shared experience, one that transcends the temporal bounds of Schubert's own life and continues to offer solace, insight, and emotional richness. His works embody the principle that art need not be loud or conspicuous to endure. Its true measure is in its capacity to reflect the quiet truths of human existence. In particular, the songs retain a unique intimacy that distinguishes Schubert from many of his contemporaries. Each slide captures a nuanced dialogue between text and music, a conversation in which the piano and the voice respond to and illuminate each other. This interplay, meticulously crafted, invites listeners into a reflective space where emotion and thought can coexist, where melancholy and consolation blend seamlessly, and where the subtleties of phrasing evoke a sense of personal connection. The afterlife of sound, in this sense, is as much about presence as it is about memory. It is the continuation of the composer's attentiveness and sensitivity, extended across time and space, and experienced by those who are willing to inhabit the quiet spaces he created. The reach of Schubert's influence extended beyond mere appreciation. Composers who followed him drew inspiration from his harmonic innovations, his melodic lyricism, and his integration of poetry into music. Even as musical styles evolved, the lessons embedded in Schubert's compositions, patience, subtlety, attentiveness, and emotional fidelity, continued to inform creative practice. The intimacy that characterized his work, the ability to speak to the human heart without grandeur or excess, became a standard against which the enduring value of composition could be measured. In this way, the afterlife of sound was not only a reflection of past brilliance, but also a living influence, shaping the way music was understood, performed, and created long after the composer's passing. Even today, the resonance of Schubert's music continues to inhabit rooms, minds, and hearts. The quiet cadences of a piano, the carefully observed rise and fall of melodic lines, and the interplay of text and sound provide a sanctuary from the haste and noise of daily life. In the attentive listener, the composer's presence endures, a gentle companion guiding through reflection, a soft echo of human emotion that transcends centuries. His songs, once confined to candlelit apartments and intimate gatherings, now carry the same meditative and contemplative power to anyone willing to slow down, to listen deeply, and to inhabit the nuanced spaces he has created. In the afterlife of sound, there is no urgency, no need for dramatic declaration. Schubert's compositions do not demand recognition. They persist quietly, patiently, and persistently. They carry the essence of his attentiveness, his subtle perception of human emotion, and his commitment to artistic integrity. His music reminds us that enduring influence is not measured in immediate applause or fleeting attention, but in the ability to provide spaces for reflection, calm, and emotional resonance. Through these works, Schubert continues to speak across time, inviting listeners to slow, to breathe, and to inhabit the quiet, persistent beauty of the world he observed so keenly. The afterlife of sound is a meditation on continuity, presence, and the enduring power of intimacy. Schubert's voice, though silent in life, remains profoundly alive in the careful phrasing, delicate harmonies, and reflective pacing of his compositions. Listeners who engage with his music experience not only the beauty of sound, but also the thoughtful, attentive life of a composer who dedicated himself fully to observation, reflection, and expression. In this way, the legacy of Schubert is not only musical, but philosophical, teaching that art, when approached with patience, sensitivity, and fidelity to the subtle rhythms of life, can continue to speak, console, and inspire long after its creator has gone. As evening descends upon Vienna, the city itself seems to exhale, settling into a rhythm of quiet and reflection. The cobblestone streets, once filled with hurried footsteps and the hum of daily life, are now softened by shadow and distance. Lanterns flicker along narrow alleys, casting gentle, wavering light that dances across walls and windows, illuminating the stillness of the city with a delicate warmth. Roofs glisten with the faint sheen of evening dew, and the sounds of carriage wheels, voices, and distant bells fade into a hushed, almost imperceptible background. It is in this hour, when the world becomes smaller, calmer, and more intimate, that the echoes of Franz Schubert's music seem to linger most profoundly. His melodies, composed for the quiet of small rooms and attentive ears, now float through the city like a soft, invisible breeze, touching each space with lingering presence and gentle remembrance. Within the apartments, homes, and modest rooms of Vienna, the traces of sound remain long after the keys have fallen silent. A piano left in a corner carries the memory of hands that once pressed its notes with careful intent. A manuscript, folded and marked with small notations, bears witness to the patient deliberation of composition. The Schubertiads, once gatherings of friends and artists in candlelit intimacy, are now recollections preserved in thought and in the subtle resonance of music that continues to be performed and cherished. The songs of Schubert, with their delicate harmonies and nuanced phrasing, echo across time, shaping the quiet of evening and the reflective calm of night. They remind listeners that music is not only a temporal experience, but a lasting presence, capable of inhabiting spaces long after its creator has gone, of offering companionship in solitude, and of guiding attention towards subtle beauty that might otherwise pass unnoticed. As the city rests, one can imagine Schubert's melodies drifting through the narrow streets, slipping under doorways, and curling around corners, carrying the intimacy of small gatherings into larger, more open spaces. The notes resonate with the same patience and attentiveness that the composer cultivated in life, revealing new subtleties with each passing moment. In the hush of night, a single phrase may linger longer than expected. Harmonies may shimmer with unexpected warmth, and the quiet pauses between sound become as expressive as the notes themselves. Vienna at rest becomes a living reflection of the music, composed, careful, gentle, and full of lingering presence. Footsteps, once hurried and purposeful, fade into silence. A distant dog barks only once before quiet returns. The murmur of conversation ceases, leaving space for reflection, for memory, and for attentive listening. In these moments, the listener becomes aware of the continuity between sound, space, and experience. Schubert's compositions, though originating in the intimate confines of candlelit rooms, extend beyond their initial context, providing a companionable rhythm to the nocturnal life of the city. They offer the possibility of pause, the chance to inhabit a reflective state, and the gentle reminder that beauty persists quietly, patiently, and without demand. There is a sense of something unfinished, yet complete. Schubert's life, like the city around him, carried both movement and stillness, action and reflection, beginning and ending with subtlety rather than declaration. His melodies, harmonies, and lyrical phrasing suggest that the work of life and music is never fully concluded, that influence, resonance, and inspiration continue to unfold in ways both visible and imperceptible. Listening to his compositions in the calm of evening reveals the cyclical nature of experience. Music echoes life, life shapes music, and both persist beyond the immediate moment. In this way, Vienna itself, settling into rest, mirrors the emotional and temporal currents embedded in the composer's oeuvre. A city and a musical world in quiet, reflective symmetry. Even as night deepens, the city's muted energy remains, carrying with it traces of the past and whispers of memory. Schubert's melodies intertwine with these currents, moving softly through rooms, across streets, and into the minds of those who take the time to listen. The intimate quality of his music, once reserved for close friends and candlelit gatherings, becomes accessible in any moment of attentiveness, in any quiet pause, in any reflective encounter with sound. The afterlife of sound, begun decades earlier, continues to unfold, demonstrating that the compositional attention, patience, and subtlety Schubert cultivated in life extend far beyond the constraints of time and place. In the stillness of Vienna at rest, the listener may notice the echoes of footsteps along cobblestones, the lingering resonance of piano keys, or the faint suggestion of voices raised in song. These are not literal sounds, but the impressions left by careful observation, deliberate creation, and deep attentiveness. The quiet persistence of Schubert's music invites a similar attentiveness, an invitation to inhabit a reflective space, to feel the subtleties of rhythm and harmony, and to embrace the intimacy of musical thought extended across time. Each song, each chamber work, each delicate piano phrase serves as both guide and companion, offering a space in which the mind can wander, the heart can resonate, and the imagination can roam freely, even as the city sleeps. Finally, there is a sense of gentle closure, not dramatic or definitive, but softly reassuring. Vienna, like Schubert's compositions, has its rhythms, its lights and shadows, its cycles of motion and stillness. The city rests, the music lingers, and both life and art continue in quiet interconnection. The legacy of Schubert is embedded not in grand gestures or loud proclamations, but in the patient unfolding of melody, the attentive shaping of harmonic subtlety, and the persistent resonance of intimacy. In the calm of night, with the city settled and the echoes of music lingering in rooms and minds alike, the listener can find a quiet, enduring sense of continuity, a space where reflection, beauty, and human presence converge, and where the music of Franz Schubert remains a soft, unwavering companion. As we draw near the close of this journey through Franz Schubert's life and music, it is worth pausing to consider the quiet persistence that defined both the man and his art. The world he inhabited was full of movement, of expectation, and of demands. Vienna itself, bustling with life, culture, and commerce, never truly paused for anyone. Yet Schubert found within it spaces of stillness, moments in which time slowed, and the subtle beauties of life could be attended to with care. He learned to listen to the wind rustling across a winter's street, to the laughter of friends in a candlelit room, to the soft resonance of a piano key lingering in the air. His attentiveness, gentle and unhurried, became the hallmark of his work, the guiding principle of a life devoted not to external acclaim, but to careful observation, reflection, and expression. In his music we encounter this same patience and intimacy. Each melody unfolds with deliberate pacing. Each harmony is chosen for its subtle emotional resonance, and each song reflects a balance between voice and accompaniment that feels like a conversation, a dialogue that can exist within any space and with any listener who chooses to inhabit it fully. Schubert's compositions teach us that artistry is not measured by grandeur alone, but by the depth of presence, the attentiveness to nuance, and the courage to dwell within quiet, unassuming spaces of emotional truth. Listening to his work is an exercise in gentle observation, a meditation on the interplay between sound, silence, and human feeling. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Schubert's legacy is how it embodies the quiet resilience of creativity in the face of life's limitations. Illness, financial insecurity, and a lack of immediate recognition might have discouraged another, but Schubert's dedication remained steadfast. In composing, performing, and sharing music with friends, he found a rhythm that was entirely his own, one that emphasized human connection, reflection, and empathy over spectacle or fame. The songs, chamber works, and piano pieces that emerge from these efforts carry the evidence of this resilience, carefully sculpted, attentive to detail, and imbued with the richness of inner life. There is also a profound generosity in Schubert's work. Though his compositions were deeply personal, they were never self-serving. They were meant to be shared, to touch others gently, and to offer companionship. In a quiet room with attentive ears and patient minds, the listener becomes part of a circle that extends beyond the temporal limits of Schubert's own life. Each note, each phrase, and each carefully observed harmonic progression invites engagement, reflection, and emotional response. His music is a subtle gift, enduring and expansive, capable of providing comfort, insight, and gentle guidance long after it was created. In contemplating Schubert's life, one also sees the profound interplay between human connection and artistic creation. Friends, collaborators, and the small social gatherings known as Schubertiads were not mere conveniences, they were integral to the development and refinement of his work. The intimacy of these interactions, the shared readings of poetry, the quiet singing, the attentive listening, provided both inspiration and a context in which creativity could flourish. Here, we witness a life lived in a kind of deliberate attentiveness to art, to companionship, to the quiet observations that informed every choice he made. This attentiveness is precisely what gives his music its enduring power, its capacity to inhabit spaces of reflection, and its gentle meditative quality that continues to resonate centuries later. Even as recognition of his genius came slowly, the afterlife of sound ensured that Schubert's creations found their way into new rooms, new homes, and new generations of listeners. Unlike the clamorous acclaim that often accompanies fame, Schubert's legacy is subtle, patient, and persistent. The songs he wrote for intimate gatherings now echo in concert halls, conservatories, and private listening spaces, carrying with them the same intimacy and attentiveness that characterized their creation. Listeners discover the patience of phrasing, the elegance of harmonic transitions, and the profound empathy embedded in each melody. The music invites one to slow down, to inhabit reflection, and to perceive beauty that is subtle yet enduring. As we step back from the details of life, illness, friendship, and creation, a larger picture emerges, that of a life in harmony with its own rhythms, in dialogue with both the inner and outer worlds, and attuned to the quiet, persistent pulse of human experience. Schubert teaches that the measure of a life well lived is not in public recognition or external reward, but in the fidelity to one's inner vision, the cultivation of patience, and the attentiveness to subtle truths. The composer's gentle insistence on presence, reflection, and care offers lessons not only in artistry but in living itself, that even amidst uncertainty and impermanence, beauty and meaning endure when nurtured with attention, empathy, and courage. Finally, the enduring resonance of Schubert's music reminds us that art has the capacity to transcend time and circumstance. From candlelit apartments in early 19th century Vienna to modern listening rooms across the globe, his melodies persist. They offer sanctuary, reflection, and companionship to those who encounter them, providing continuity where the immediacy of life is fleeting. The quiet elegance, the attentive shaping of emotion, and the persistence of subtle beauty in his works exemplify a creative legacy that continues to unfold, to inspire, and to console. In the stillness of evening, in the hush of a reflective room, or in the thoughtful listening of an attentive mind, the presence of Franz Schubert endures, soft yet unwavering, offering the listener a space to rest, to reflect, and to inhabit the beauty of attentive, patient, and human artistry. As our journey through his life and work comes to a close, we return to the central truth that has guided this exploration, that intimacy, attentiveness, and care are the hallmarks of enduring creativity. In the delicate rise and fall of a melody, the interplay of text and accompaniment, and the quiet attention to emotional nuance, we encounter a composer who lived not for spectacle, but for presence, not for recognition, but for fidelity to the quiet rhythms of experience. His life and music remind us that even the softest voice, when sustained with attention and care, can leave a lasting echo across centuries. Let your breath deepen as you reflect on the persistence of beauty, the continuity of sound, and the quiet power of attentive creation. The songs linger, the city rests, and the life of Franz Schubert, though brief in years, continues to inhabit the minds and hearts of all who choose to listen with care. In the gentle unfolding of melody, harmony, and reflective pause, there is a lesson that transcends music, that a life observed with attentiveness, expressed with care, and shared with quiet generosity, is a life that resonates far beyond the immediate moment, offering consolation, insight, and companionship for all time.